I never imagined betrayal could shatter my world so completely. There she was, my beautiful wife, locked in a lover's embrace. In that moment, everything changed. My heart broke, rage consumed me, and revenge became my only solace. The confrontation was inevitable, a storm of emotions and violence. In the shadows, I plotted, watching their every move. This isn't just a story of love gone wrong. It's a tale of deceit, vengeance, and the brutal consequences of betrayal. Welcome to my nightmare, where passion and fury collide. My name is Clinton Coroners. I am 35 years old, and at the start of this story, I felt confused and angry. I didn't know much about my situation. Sure, there were other things happening in my life, but I was blissfully unaware of how lost I really was. As I looked around the small airport terminal, I was still surprised at how my boss had convinced me to be there, doing what I was doing. It was a Friday morning in autumn, the day after Thanksgiving, and everyone else at our company, like most Americans, was relaxing. Yet there I was in this tiny terminal, waiting for a smaller plane to take me north to Canada. My goal was to make a deal with a small Canadian factory that could help us produce parts. The company, North Star Manufacturing, claimed to have advanced machines that were better than what we had. I heard from others that they only had 5 or 6 workers. I wasn't sure how such a small company could produce all the parts we needed, but my boss insisted I go and see for myself. I still remember the conversation that took my mind off the fun we were having the night before. I was with 8 other people, my wife Kathy, my brother Chuck, and his wife Annie. My parents and Kathy's parents had just started talking about my mother's favorite subject. "So when are we getting grandchildren from you two?" she asked. And soon Kathy's mother joined in, agreeing with her. Everyone turned and looked at me. The smirk on my father's face showed that he enjoyed watching me squirm under my mother's questions. Just as I was about to shift the focus onto Kathy, the phone rang. Kathy dashed into the kitchen to grab it with a smile that told me she had left me to face my mother alone. But just a few moments later, she returned with a frown. "This is for you, honey," she said, handing me the phone. It was Frank, my boss. Only he would call me during a holiday dinner. Frank was all about work. I imagined he had grown tired of family talk and wanted to discuss plans with me. For the first time, I was glad he thought of me. "Yes, Frank. Happy Thanksgiving to you too," I said into the phone. "Clint, I've been thinking," he said. "I don't want to ruin your holiday, but I need you to come to the office tomorrow morning. I have another big idea." As soon as I hung up, I knew I wouldn't like his big idea. I used this call as an excuse to escape. I pretended I needed to check an important email at our home office. Alone in my office, I looked at my personal email and played a few games until I heard my parents getting ready to leave. I made it downstairs just in time to see the door closing behind them. "I can't believe he called you on a holiday," my father said. "What a tough boss." "Yes, but someday I'll lead the company," I replied. "He doesn't have sons, and his daughter isn't interested in business." "Maybe her partner will be," my father suggested. "It doesn't matter," I said. "Frank is not the type to give the company to a woman." "I hope he sees how hard you work," my father finally said. Anyway, that morning I was in Frank's office listening to him explain the trip to Canada. Going on this trip would earn me a bonus and a company-paid trip to Hawaii for me and Kathy. One thing I liked about Frank was that he expected a lot, but also gave a lot in return. For this trip, he arranged for me to fly on a small private jet. It was a luxury aircraft that could hold no more than 15 passengers at once. I would avoid long lines and uncomfortable seats. There wouldn't be any loud kids or difficult passengers. Frank also booked me a nice hotel with all the amenities. He even said I could take Kathy along. Kathy looked at me with sympathy when I told her and shook her head. "It won't work, cowboy," she said with a smile. "I love you, and I hate that you have to do this on your day off. But remember, you're working hard now so we can enjoy life later. But tomorrow is Black Friday, and I don't want to miss the sales to travel around Canada with you. Call me often and hurry back," she added. So far, the day had gone well. There was no snow yet, which was rare for November in Michigan. The temperature was in the upper 40s and low 50s, so I took my Mustang out for a drive. I liked that the airline offered indoor parking. It made me feel good that my Mustang would be safe while I was away. I was only going to be gone for 2 days, but I still worried about my car. With everything taken care of, I focused on my task ahead. Boarding the plane was simple. I just showed up at the hangar as the plane was getting ready to leave. I didn't need a ticket. I only showed my driver's license as proof of who I was. The woman checked my name and I got on the plane. Some people were already seated. 2 men in dark suits were working on their laptops and hardly looked up. A businesswoman and her assistant were also there, both busy with their own tasks. An older woman was reading a magazine, while 2 other guys looked like they were technicians. I chose a seat in the middle, hoping it would be quieter. Moments later, a loud older man entered with 2 younger guys who seemed to work for him. They were chatting loudly, making it hard to concentrate. Other passengers glanced at them, but the oldest just stared back, ignoring the discomfort he was causing. As the woman with the list checked again, another woman walked in. Everyone turned to look at her. She was nothing like Katie. Katie was taller and slimmer, or so I thought until I saw this new woman. In a flash, I felt a mix of surprise and anger. Seeing her made me realize that Katie didn't seem as special anymore. Even covered up, this new woman had a presence that drew attention. I could see that her outfit hid more than it revealed, but there was something about her that was hard to ignore. I found my thoughts wandering, imagining how it would feel to be close to her. It was distracting, and I couldn't help but notice her legs and the way she carried herself. Our eyes met, and I felt a pull that made me look away. It was too intense, almost like breaking an unspoken rule. I quickly realized I wasn't the only one noticing her. Many others were looking her way as well. Just then, the loud man got up and headed toward her, his expression changing as he approached. Before he could say anything, she turned and sat down next to me. "Is anyone sitting here?" she asked. I shook my head in surprise, unable to do much else. Her voice had a lovely sound, almost musical, which added to my confusion. I felt anger, but it was directed at myself. For years, I had been committed to Katie, and now I found myself caught up in thoughts of someone else. As she settled in beside me, I wondered if she felt anything at all about the attention she seemed to get. The loud man returned to his seat, shooting me a look that was unwelcoming. "Would you like to sit by the window?" I asked carefully. "Why not, dear?" she replied with a smile. Her kindness made me forget for a moment how much older she might be than me. I gave her the window seat, wanting to enjoy her presence without interruptions. I figured if she were in the aisle, others may come over to talk to her. As the plane's engines roared to life, I studied her, my mind filled with questions. How old is she? What job does she have? I noticed some rings on her fingers, but no wedding or engagement ring. That made me think of my own ring, which suddenly felt heavy on my finger, reminding me of Katie back home. To distract myself, I pulled out my iPad and tried to focus on work. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. I hadn't touched her or crossed any lines. My marriage was secure just as it had been that morning. But the feeling of distraction lingered, and the short flight promised to be quite the journey. I didn't really betray Katie. Besides, what she doesn't know won't hurt her. I told myself it was just a quick feeling of guilt. I felt this way many times over the years, so feeling it again as Kyle came closer wasn't new to me. I usually handled it by being extra nice to my clients for a few days. Most people I know think Clint and I have a perfect life. We have all the signs of a successful couple. We live in a beautiful house. I chose it, and Clint works hard to make sure I have almost everything I need. Soon, we will think about having kids, and then we hope to retire comfortably and happily. Maybe we'll travel to some amazing places everyone talks about, or maybe we'll just keep doing what makes us happy. Most people I know would be shocked if they knew what I do. The idea of me being with someone else would make them think I was a terrible person. They would say I was the worst person in our town for a long time. But in reality, many of my friends would start looking for my husband. Single people would try to get close to him right away. Married women would take a little more time. Most of my male friends would want to be the next to be with me, but none of them would think about marrying me. They would just want to be with someone who was available. Most people I know follow the crowd. They live their lives without thinking for themselves. They want the same things as everyone else. They live by the saying, happy wife, happy life. But the truth is, I wasn't happy. Not at all. I married Clint with high hopes, but somewhere along the way, I became tired of being second or third in his life. His job always seemed more important than my happiness. He thought giving me nice things was enough, but it didn't make me happy. I wanted attention, and if that didn't come from my husband, I found it elsewhere. Kyle ran up to me with excitement, saying, "I missed you so much." I smiled and joked, "You act like I'm the only person here." He replied, "Well, to me you are. You're the only one I care about." "How long do we have?" I asked. "Maybe 2 days," I said, "or 3. We rushed up the stairs. He grabbed my hand playfully with each step. Once we reached my bedroom, we quickly took off our clothes. After a moment, I made a mistake I should have avoided. I let him talk. "Is the car in the garage?" he asked. "No," I answered. "He took it to the airport." "Are you upset?" he asked, sounding disappointed. "No, not really," I said. "But it seems like you want to drive my husband's car more than you want me." "No, I just thought it would be fun. You say he never lets anyone drive it." Just then, the phone rang, and I grabbed it from the table. After a quick chat, I turned to him and said he had to go. "I thought I was staying for a couple of days," he said sadly. "My mom and mother-in-law are coming over," I said, "and they'll be looking for things to gossip about. I'll call you when I'm back." He got dressed and left quietly. I spent the day shopping with my family and listening to them tell me how much Clint loved me. With every compliment, my guilt grew. We had dinner together after shopping. As usual, I ended up buying more gifts for Clint than I meant to, which only made me think about our future. I didn't really know what I wanted. I wasn't sure if I loved Clint. I just knew I loved the nice life his job gave us. Even if I wasn't sure about my feelings for him, I didn't want to lose that lifestyle. I cared about Clint, and I didn't want to hurt him. I thought about divorcing him again, and remembered it would be a bad idea. Neither of us wanted that. Clint truly loved me, and a divorce would only cause pain for both of us. At 35, I wasn't young anymore. I had seen so many women struggle after divorce. Many of them faced tough times, feeling used and losing their confidence. They went from having a stable life to struggling. I felt sorry for those who remarried too. They often had to deal with bad partners because it was better than being alone. Those who never remarried were the most unhappy. They ended up lonely, dreaming of spending time with grandkids instead. And if I divorced Clint, what would come next? Kyle? No way. I knew I wasn't that foolish. First, I didn't truly like Kyle. I just enjoyed the attention he gave me. Even at 27, he was not at all suited for my life. Kyle didn't have a job or a plan and had never gone to college. There was no way he could take care of me like Clint did. Kyle only dreamed of becoming a successful rapper. I've heard him rap, and he's not good at all. I don't know much about hip-hop, but I can tell it's not great. Honestly, if I had to, I could probably do better than Kyle in a rap battle. The other reason I don't like him is that I'm not foolish. I realize that even though he says otherwise, the main reason Kyle is with me is for the money I give him. Of course, we're physical, and he enjoys that because I let him. But Kyle doesn't care for me any more than I care for him. I was deep in thought for so long that I lost track of time. It surprised me when my mother-in-law pointed out how late it had become. "We need to get you home so you can take calls from clients," she said, and my mom agreed. Really, Clint should have called me on my phone by now, even if it was just to say he had arrived. But when I got home, he still hadn't called. I started to feel anxious and ran through everything in my mind. We hadn't argued, and he kissed me like he wanted to be with me that morning. He even asked me to go with him again. As far as I knew, he wasn't upset with me. So why hadn't he called? Just then, my phone rang, and I picked it up quickly. "Why didn't you call me sooner? I was so worried," I said. "You told me not to call," Kyle replied, sounding confused. "I'm outside, freezing. Can I come in?" Clint had never gone this long without talking to me before, especially when he was away. I tried to find reasons for his silence, but nothing made sense. Canada was not a place without phone service. Maybe he found out about Kyle, but I didn't really think that was it. Clint was an honest man. If he knew about Kyle, he would definitely confront me. He loved me too much to play games. The only thing that made sense was that he met some clients, and they took him out for a meal, making him lose track of time. I opened the door and called to Kyle, who was hiding outside, shivering. As soon as he came in, I noticed that my neighbor Ethel was watching me closely. I would have to think of a good excuse for her before Clint returned. Kyle quickly entered the house and began taking off his coat. I pushed my worries about Clint aside for now, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't enjoy my time with Kyle. Deep down, I felt something was off. After a bit, Kyle broke the silence. "So your husband thinks you're upset about him leaving?" He chuckled. "Yes," I replied, wanting to keep it short. "What a fool," Kyle said, laughing. "Yes, a fool," I echoed. "Can you believe he loves me so much that he hates leaving? He even begged me to go with him. How silly is that?" Kyle agreed, not realizing I was being sarcastic. He didn't understand that I loved someone else. I couldn't help but laugh again when I thought about how hard Clint worked to earn money and how it supported Kyle. It felt like Clint was paying me for being with Kyle. I fell silent after this thought, and even Kyle noticed it. "Of course I'd be with you for free," he added, trying to recover from his slip. "I'd pay to be with you," he said almost too quickly. We both knew that was a lie. "Okay, let's be real," I said. "Do you think I'd take money for that? You think I'm that kind of woman?" "No, that's not what I mean," he stammered. "Then what do you mean, Kyle?" I asked, realizing how foolish I had been. "As soon as I get a record deal, I'll take you away from here. It'll be you and me against the world," he said. At that moment, I realized how foolish we both were. I knew if Kyle ever made any real money, he would spend it on someone else without a second thought. I was naive for thinking I meant more to him than I did. I had everything I had ever wanted, but I was risking it all every time I let Kyle close. In the dark, with this immature person in my house, I finally understood my brokenness. I recognized that Kyle was just my way of rebelling against Clint for not putting me first. I was too scared to confront Clint directly. I didn't want him to lose his job or find something that paid less, which might require me to get a job to help out. It was far easier to express my disappointment by letting someone else have what Clint believed was only his. Me. As the plane took off, I felt a wave of panic. I had never flown in such a small plane before. I preferred traveling by car as I hated flying. If I had to, I would always choose a large commercial flight. But I couldn't this time. I was returning home to visit my last living relative, Aunt Alice. I spent Thanksgiving with her at her nursing home. She didn't look too well. Maybe I should think about moving her back to Michigan. My Aunt Alice was the only family member who didn't judge me for my choices. It was my situation that put me on that tiny plane. I was going to Toronto for a temporary job. Temporary jobs were rare for me. I mostly worked in a niche market. I was surprised I could make money from it. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have stood a chance. But now, it seemed everyone was willing to embrace their unique needs and interests. The plane started to shake and rattle as it took off. I heard a strange metal clanging sound as we tried to climb higher. Was this normal? I didn't think so, but nobody else seemed worried. It sounded like my car did right before it broke down. My heart raced and I grabbed the life jacket. I was used to feeling this way. It was one reason I tried not to draw attention to myself. People say we live in a good time now. Women have more rights than they ever did. We can own businesses, and soon we might get paid the same as men. In many jobs, we even make more. If a woman feels uncomfortable at work because of stares or unwanted comments, she can tell human resources about it. It's funny, but even if a woman is safer at her job, she can still face trouble and insults outside. From the moment I got on the plane, I felt like everyone was watching me. Most men and even some women were looking at me openly. I was used to this from men, but having women stare made me uneasy. They say women notice things about each other's bodies, and it felt like tiny bugs were crawling on my chest. To my left, I felt another stare. I turned and met the gaze of a man who seemed predatory. I had seen many men like him in my life. He looked like he would treat me disrespectfully. But then I noticed a man sitting right across from me with warm, gentle brown eyes. He looked at me too, but his gaze was different. He seemed to admire my presence, yet he felt a bit sorry about it. There was kindness in his eyes, and it was clear he was not someone who would harm me, unlike the other man who was now approaching. I moved closer to the kind man and sat next to him. Up close, his eyes were even more inviting. Then, he did something wonderful. He offered me the window seat and positioned himself between me and the aggressive man. It felt like I was in a safe bubble. But this comfort was short-lived. He seemed torn, maybe shy, not wanting to make things awkward. I wondered if he was just the type to help others then slip away afterward. But I had other things on my mind, so I pushed that thought away. As the plane took off with a loud sound, I grabbed his hand tightly. I leaned against him, feeling safe. Unfortunately, our hands were awkwardly close, and I realized how our arms were pressed together. He quickly felt how close we were and froze, looking surprised. I could see him trying to process everything, though I felt a bit scared. Then he did something unexpected. He untangled our hands but held on to mine gently. "Don't worry," he said with the kindest smile. I felt like I could get lost in those warm eyes. But what did I know? At 47, I had been in love only once, and it hadn't turned out well. "Flying is the safest way to travel," he explained. "But sometimes it feels scary. When cars have accidents, usually only a few people get hurt. But when planes crash, it's much worse." "You're exaggerating," he chuckled. "We're just hitting some bumps. It's usually rough during takeoff and landing, but then it smooths out." "Sure, but doesn't it feel strange flying in a metal tube thousands of feet in the air?" I joked, moving my hands animatedly. It was funny how my movements caught the attention of the people around us, especially the man who had been staring. "My name's Clint," he whispered. "I promise I'll keep you safe, Delilah." I smiled back at him, feeling a sense of warmth. He talked about where he was headed and his work, and sadly mentioned his wife. As we held hands during the flight, my fears faded away. I felt calm and happy, not wanting to let go of his hand. For once, I allowed myself to enjoy the moment. I had always been cautious, but I was ready to let myself feel free. If this man asked me to share something adventurous, I would consider it. I didn't care about his relationship for this short time. I just enjoyed listening to him. He made me laugh and feel special. The amazing part was that through our conversation, his eyes stayed glued on mine. He commented on my blue-green eyes, and each time it sent a thrill through me. I felt ready to get upset when the flight attendant interrupted us to let us know that we were on schedule and would land in an hour. She mentioned that a storm was coming, but assured us that the plane was fast enough to avoid it. However, she said we should have warm clothes for our stay in Canada. During her talk with us, I noticed her eyes kept darting from my face to Clint. I wondered if she was interested in either of us. I brushed her off without thinking, wanting to enjoy my time with Clint. Everything felt magical. It was one of those rare moments that life gives us. When she finally left in a huff, Clint turned to me. "Hey, you should look out the other side of the plane," he said. "For what?" I replied. "Isn't this side flying over the same land?" "Yes, but maybe it's nicer on the other side," he said. "I doubt it. I mean, my eyes are up here. They're kind of unique," I said, smiling. "Just think about it, or maybe go back to your seat," he joked. The flight attendant seemed cheerful about something. Then there was a loud sound that startled everyone. Suddenly, the plane jerked sharply to the left and dropped suddenly before it steadied out. But as it tried to regain its balance, we heard more loud sounds and saw through the window that flames were coming from the left engine. Everything changed in an instant. I couldn't think straight because someone was screaming nearby. Clint quickly covered my mouth to show me that I was the one screaming. I climbed over the armrest and pressed against him, frightened. The plane started shaking, and it was clear that we were falling fast. My fear grew, and Clint seemed to sense it. He held my hand tightly and pulled us 2 rows forward. "Please sit down," the flight attendant yelled. Clint shoved us into the seats he picked. He grabbed pillows and told me to bend down. "Keep your head down, Delilah," he said calmly, squeezing my hand and smiling at me. Even though I was scared, that smile soothed me. Just when I thought the fear couldn't increase, he kissed me. In that moment of chaos, my brain recorded that kiss as if it were something special. Then the plane hit something hard, and it sounded like 1,000 crashes. Everything was upside down. The floor felt like it was the ceiling for a brief moment. Everyone on the flight started to scream together. Then there was a strong thud that knocked the breath out of me, and everything went black. When I woke up, it was night, and the room was pitch dark. I heard a loud noise next to me. It was Kyle, snoring like a lawnmower. It was hard to sleep with the noise. I also noticed something else. Body language shows our true feelings. While I slept, Kyle moved as far from me as he could, and I mirrored him. Clint would always wrap me in his arms, even if we had a disagreement. When we fell asleep together, I felt safe and warm. Despite our fights, those moments were always comforting. I suddenly felt lonely and unsure of myself. Why should I feel alone next to Kyle? Maybe this meant Kyle wasn't important to me. I sat in the dark, trying to understand my feelings and what had gone wrong in my life. When I married Clint, I was sure I loved him, and I still think I do deep down. But I hated feeling like second place to his job. He believed he needed to work hard for our future, thinking it was all for us. But honestly, I wished he would work less or find a job with more time for us. If he could do that, maybe Kyle wouldn't be in the picture. I also realized that I hadn't been fair to Clint. It was easy for me to ask him for things, but I never really told him how I felt about his job. To some extent, men often connect their worth with their work, while women tend to connect with family and relationships. Maybe I was scared that if I told Clint to choose between me and Frank, I wouldn't like what he picked. I also thought about whether that was really fair. Clint spent all his free time with me, while I had plenty of hobbies. I had lots of friends and many fun things to do after work. Poor Clint had only two loves, me first and his Mustang second. He adored that car. He never let anyone touch it. A tear rolled down my cheek in the dark. He loved that car so much. He worked hard to buy it, but he didn't even think about getting it until he bought me the car I wanted. It was his choice, and he chose to buy my car first, even after working so hard. This caring man loved me, right? Maybe he cared about his job too much. But he loved me more than anything. Why hadn't I seen this? Was I really just a spoiled brat like my parents often said? I was ready to give Clint's Mustang keys to Kyle? That would be a huge mistake. Clint can sense something tiny on that car from far away. He would have noticed right away if someone had been in that car. He probably knew the exact mileage on the odometer. Letting Kyle drive would mean the end of my marriage. Was that what I wanted? Deep down, I didn't want Clint out of my life. I started seeing Kyle to get back at Clint for choosing his job over me. Now, that felt foolish and childish. It was like a teenager acting out because their parents disapprove. She gets a tattoo just to annoy them, but that ugly tattoo only makes her hide it forever. I sat in the dark, quietly crying, again wondering where Clint was and why he hadn't called. This never happened before, and I began to think he might have found out about Kyle. I reached out in the dark and hit Kyle. He woke up confused. "Go sleep on the couch," I said. "Your snoring keeps me awake." "I don't snore," he replied, but I complained that it felt like a construction site. "Well, sleeping excites me," he said. "I can't help it." At that moment, I decided Kyle had to go. Maybe we could make our last night memorable. "Kyle, I can help you with that," I said gently. Then I woke up in a nightmare. At first, I didn't know where I was or how I got there. It was very cold, and it looked like snow was falling. Something warm and soft was underneath me. When I tried to sit up, something heavy stopped me. It was very heavy and made noise when I moved. I could have pushed it off, but it was smarter to crawl out from underneath it. As I crawled out, I realized the warm thing was a person. Suddenly, I remembered everything, the plane crash. I calmed myself. I was alive and could still think. I tried to recall what had happened and realized I could do it. This was a good sign, probably no brain damage or concussion. I carefully moved, flexing my arms from shoulders to elbows, then wrists, and finally fingers. Other than a few cuts, they felt fine. I did the same with my legs and feet. Everything seemed okay. However, my upper back hurt a lot. I could still move my muscles there. That was a relief. I remembered how I protected Delia when the plane fell. The luggage compartment had fallen on us. I crawled out from under her and turned to Delia. "Delia, are you okay?" I asked. "I think so," she replied sleepily. "I'm cold and my leg hurts a lot." "I'm sorry," I said. "I'll get you out of here as soon as it's safe." I stood up and looked around. It was dark, but my eyes adjusted slowly, helped by a few small lights. I saw the plane had broken into pieces. I remembered moving Delia and me a few rows ahead of our seat. Now, I felt glad I had. I had read that some places were safer during a crash. I moved us to one of those spots, and it paid off. The part of the plane we were in was pretty intact, but everything in front of us was a mess, like a crumpled piece of paper. The front of the plane broke apart to protect us from the impact. In that area of chaos, nothing moved. I could barely see some body parts among the wreckage. Then I saw her, the flight attendant who told us we'd land in an hour. Her body was badly hurt. Her face was unrecognizable, and though it was horrific, when I looked into her eyes, it seemed like she was trying to say something. Then her gaze turned blank. Her pain was clearly over. The plane had a tear in it, and snow fell into the cabin. I noticed a strong smell. It smelled like gas, probably jet fuel with a fire burning nearby. It might just be a matter of time before parts of the plane caught fire or exploded. I looked at Delia. "Delia, we need to get out of here," I said. "I prefer it when you call me sweetheart," she said. I grabbed her arm and tried to pull her out from under the luggage compartment, but then I heard her shout, "Clint, stop! My leg is stuck!" I knelt down to look at her left leg. I checked from her thigh to her foot. She was free until the very bottom. "It's not my leg that hurts, but you can check any time," she said. "I have a lot of spots you can feel sorry for," I replied. I only wanted to understand what was happening. "You didn't say which leg hurt, so I started with the closest one." Despite the pain, she smiled at me. I moved to check her other leg and saw that her lower leg, from her knee to her ankle, was caught between the seat we were on and the seat in front of us. There was no way to free her without moving that seat or doing something drastic. At the same time, I could smell jet fuel getting stronger. It wouldn't be long before this area of the plane caught fire. "Oh no!" I shouted. "You need to get your leg free first." She chuckled. "We'd enjoy it more that way." "That's a bright sense of humor," I said with a laugh. She replied, "Who's joking?" I looked around for something to help us. There had to be an emergency kit somewhere, but I found nothing. Then I noticed one of the broken seats. The frame was made of strong steel tubes. I knocked one of the tubes out and went back to Delia. I pushed the tube between the seats and used all my strength to pull them apart. It worked. Just then, I noticed smoke rising from the other side, and small flames were starting to lick the walls. "We need to get out of here!" I exclaimed. I pushed harder, but suddenly the tube bent under the pressure, and the seats finally separated. Delia gasped. "That hurt," she said. I rushed back to the broken seat and grabbed 2 tubes this time. "Delia, this is our last chance," I said. "I know your leg hurts. We don't know if it's damaged, but you have to move it, no matter how much it hurts. The plane is about to catch fire. We have to either get you out or risk staying in here." She looked sad. "What if I can't?" she said. "You have to try," I answered firmly. "I promised you would be safe, and I meant it. Get ready." I slid the 2 tubes into the gap. I put all my weight into it, and with a loud noise, the space between the seats widened. Delia pulled her leg free just as one tube broke and the other bent. "Let's go, Delia, we have to leave," I shouted as flames started to creep closer. She struggled to step on her foot, so I turned around and carried her on my back to the open end of the plane. The place we were exiting was about 10 feet above the ground, and the opening was filled with sharp metal edges. I grabbed a piece of carpet and pulled it toward the opening. "Sit on it!" I shouted. "I'll jump. Then you can slide down and I'll catch you to help you land. Just keep your hurt leg up." Before she could respond, I jumped into the darkness. On the ground, I could see small lights. We were in a thick forest and pieces of the plane were scattered around. Once I landed, I reached out to her. She slid to the edge and then fell into my arms. It was quite a strain carrying her. She was not small. I held her securely. "Clint, if you wanted to hold me, all you had to do was ask," she joked with a grin. "That goes for me too," a voice called from behind us. "I think God is looking out for troublemakers," Delia whispered. As soon as I had her safely in my arms, the section of the plane we left caught fire. I pulled Delia away, dragging her to safety. "What's wrong with her?" asked a loud voice. "It's her leg," I replied. "She can't walk." "That's too bad," he said. "It's a shame to lose such beauties." "You can't lose what you never had," Delia shot back at him. He just shrugged and moved away, saying he could handle it. He walked to another part of the plane where a couple of other people were waiting, including a flight attendant who was helping an injured man. I saw that some people had gathered supplies from their section. I noticed that a tail part of the plane was missing, probably thrown far when the plane crashed. Bodies were on the ground, and some survivors were wearing torn clothes for warmth. One of the men went back inside, calling for another man to follow. They seemed to be looking for more useful things. "Clint!" I heard Delia scream again. I turned to see the loud man approaching her once more. I rushed back. They were having an intense conversation. "Hey, buddy," he said with a big smile. "Have you talked to my team? Are you thinking of joining us?" "Stop lying," Delia stated sharply. "He wants you to go with them because you're strong. He thinks I should stay here with someone who can't move. Those of us who can make it should leave this way," he argued. He pointed in the direction the plane was flying and said we should just leave everything behind. I asked him, "Hey, buddy, this is Canada. Anyone who stays out here will freeze long before anyone can find us." We were on a small private jet. The pilot owned the company, and one of the flight attendants was his wife. Everyone who worked for the company was on board. Nobody was searching for us. We were stuck in the wilderness. There was no cell phone signal here. We couldn't call for help. As you heard on the plane, a big winter storm was coming. The plane was going about 300 miles per hour, escaping the storm for now. The snow would start to pile up any minute. If we didn't start moving, we could all freeze. People who couldn't keep up would just slow us down. "This is nature. Only the strongest survive," I said. "What does that have to do with you wanting to be with me?" Delia asked. He hesitated, looking at her. "Look at her. Do you even know who she is?" I sighed and said, "We'll be fine, just the two of us." He replied, just as an explosion shook the part of the jet where his friends had just come in. We all turned at the screams coming from inside, then suddenly the screams stopped. "Can we take some of those clothes you took from the other passenger? Delia is cold," I asked. He just laughed. "You guys are going to freeze out here. Why would I waste clothes that survivors could use? Besides, she must be used to being without clothes." "Forget you," Delia spat back. "Anytime, anywhere," he smiled. A woman and another man came near him. "It's starting to snow," she said, and the man continued. "Josh just passed away. We need to leave, boss." He waved goodbye, and the three of them walked away without looking back. "You probably should have gone with them," Delia told me. "You could keep up with them easily." "Why?" I asked. "We were almost 300 miles from where we were headed when the plane went down. They won't go that far. I noticed we were flying over a few small houses when the plane began to drop. They couldn't be more than a few miles behind us. Come on, we need to hurry." As I spoke to him, I saw the back of the plane. "Why should we go there?" Delia asked. "That's where all the supplies are," I said. I turned around and knelt down in front of her. Then I stood up and carried her further into the woods. It was farther than I expected, and the snow was starting to cover everything. When we finally got there, I climbed to the back of the plane. Inside was a mess. I kicked open the broken door. I found several shelves filled with blankets. I grabbed a few and carried them outside for Delia, then went back in to search more. I collected supplies and filled one blanket with first aid items and frozen meals from the plane. I packed as much as I could carry, including drinks and water bottles, plus a few small bottles of alcohol. I took some emergency kits with flashlights and tools. I tied the corners of a blanket to carry everything and left the damaged part of the plane. When I returned to Delia, I saw a damaged piece of metal from the plane. I bent it until one end was almost flat. I threaded a strap through the hole at the other end to make it stronger. Then I threaded one of the blankets through the strap. I laid out several blankets to make a sled, then gently placed Delia on it. I wrapped her in the blankets and loaded the supplies on the sled. "Try to sleep," I told her. "Are you warmer?" She nodded. I pulled the sled back to where the rest of the plane was and started walking in the direction from where we'd come. Delia talked to me as I walked. Keeping busy helped me feel warm at first, but soon my hands got cold. I hid them in my jacket pockets and kept walking. After about an hour, I started to feel tired. Delia had fallen asleep a little earlier. She was worn out from everything we had experienced. Before she closed her eyes, she said, "Thank you for everything you've done for me." I wanted to take a break, but it felt strange. I usually ran every day and could cover 5 or 6 miles easily. But while pulling the sled, I was losing energy even before reaching 2 miles. I knew if I stopped for even a moment, I might not be able to get back up. If I fell into the snow, no one would know what happened to me. What would happen to Delia? What about my family? Thoughts of my loved ones kept me moving long after I wanted to quit. Finally, I spotted them. A group of small houses about half a mile away. They were to my left, which made me realize I must have turned the wrong way while walking. If I had kept going straight, I would have reached them by now. In the distance, I heard some animal sounds. I headed toward the houses, and when I arrived, I noticed a fence around the area. The big gate was locked, but the smaller gate for people was easy to open. I pulled the sled through the gate and went to the first house I saw. The place appeared to be an abandoned hunting lodge. The cabin I picked wasn't the biggest, but it looked the most intact. The front door was locked, so I went to the largest building, which seemed to be an office. I knocked the door down. The old rotting wood made it easy to hide behind the table, just as I had hoped. There was a board with keys for all the houses. I took the key for house number 6 and went back. I opened the door and pulled Delia inside. The house had a fireplace, but no wood. I looked around the other houses and found only a few small pieces, but behind the main house, I discovered a large pile of firewood. The top pieces were wet, but I grabbed as much as I could carry and brought it back to cabin number 6. I stacked the wood in the fireplace and opened the blanket that held our supplies from one of the emergency kits. I found several matchboxes and some old newspapers in the cabin, which I laid out with the firewood. I lit the newspapers, and soon we had a warm fire. I pulled Delia closer to it. There was a sofa nearby, so I placed one of the blankets on the sofa and laid Delia down on it. Using a flashlight, I checked her ankle. It was swollen, but it felt similar to her other ankle, which was uninjured. I wrapped her ankle with an elastic bandage I found in one of the medical kits. Then I carefully examined her knee. "Are you going to check my knee too?" she asked with a smile. "Do you want me to make this easier by taking off my skirt?" "I'm just trying to see if your knee is hurt," I replied quickly, feeling a bit flustered. "I didn't mean it like that." She smiled at me again. "Where are we? How did we end up with all this stuff? I'm a little cold, but at least I'm not freezing." "Clint, you're a lifesaver," she said gratefully. I let her hold the flashlight while I looked at her knee. Unlike her ankle, her knee was not swollen, it was just bruised. I guessed it would be better in 3 to 4 days, while her ankle would take about a week before she could put any weight on it. Delia yawned and took off her jacket. Seeing her in just a blouse reminded me of how put together she was. I handed her a can of juice and she started drinking while I added another log to the fire. I knew we would need more wood to stay warm throughout the night, so I set an alarm for 3 in the morning. "I just wish we had something to mix with this juice," she said. "After everything we've been through, we deserve it." I went outside to the porch where the food was wrapped in plastic bags. I thought it was safe even if some animals managed to get over the fence. I also grabbed a small bottle of liquor. I walked back to the couch, took a can of orange juice from Delia, and poured in some vodka before handing it back to her. Then I took off my shoes, grabbed a blanket, and lay down in front of the fire. "Come up here to the sofa with me," she said. "I promise I won't dream about you." We needed each other's warmth to stay comfortable. A few minutes later, I was lying on the big cozy sofa with her under the blanket, watching the fire. As the snow piled up outside, I soon drifted off to sleep, wondering about what was happening with the group outside. Morning came, and Kyle walked into my room. He greeted me, trying to act nonchalant. Just then, the phone rang. "Kyle, get away from me!" I exclaimed. "I need to answer the phone." I reached for the phone and managed to grab it just before it went to voicemail. "Hi, Katie, it's Frank," he said. My heart sank. "Have you heard anything from Clint?" "No," I replied. "I haven't heard." "Look, Katie, I didn't mean to send him away so soon, especially during the holiday, but I see Clint like a son. When I leave the business, it all has to be done right." I was shocked. Clint had often said he wanted to be in charge one day, but I never thought he meant he would own the entire business. "What about your daughter?" I asked. "I love my daughter," he replied. "I will leave her everything I own, but I want someone who cares about the business to run it." He mentioned that he hoped any son born later would carry his name. "Just don't let Clint know about this," he added. If Clint called, I needed to tell him to call Frank immediately. "I'll do that," I said, but I wanted to know if Frank had any idea why Clint hadn't been in touch. "I spoke to some people in Canada," Frank explained. "They don't have time off for our holidays. If Clint arrived yesterday, they probably worked all night." Frank assured me that there was a chance Clint could return soon, as he had arranged for a private business jet. After hanging up, I turned to Kyle. "Go away, I think Clint is coming home," I said firmly. "But what about—" he began, but I cut him off. "Hey, Kyle, do you want to have fun or do you need money for rent?" I asked. "Why can't I have both?" he complained. "I really care about you. My new song is all about you. It's called, 'Why Are You So Cold?'" I couldn't help but laugh. "Kyle, I know a lot of people, and they don't talk like that." I wrote him a check, gathered his things, and gently pushed him out the door, still chuckling. It could have been worse. He might have tried to perform it for me. I cleaned the house as if I were on a mission. I wanted to remove all signs of Kyle before Clint got home. It was typical of Kyle to work late just to surprise me. I also kept thinking about Frank possibly leaving his business to us. We could become wealthy and spend our retirement traveling and enjoying life. I planned to start working on the kids as soon as Clint returned. Later that evening, Frank called again. I told him that I still hadn't heard from Clint. "Katie, honey, I have bad news," he said. I got excited. "Did he call you? When will he come home?" "Katie, the plane hasn't landed. He went missing between Detroit and Buffalo Gap." I couldn't believe it. I struggled to listen. "We don't know if anything bad happened," he said. "If there had been an accident, we would have heard about it. We just have to wait for news." I called both our parents to update them. For the first week, I was on the phone nonstop. Our parents, both Clint's and mine, stayed with me. Frank called every day. A week later, things started to feel normal again. I was still in touch with the authorities in America and Canada, but there was no new information. Then Kyle visited me. He clearly came back for the money, but I didn't mind. I was tired of being alone. Kyle said he missed me and that a week apart felt too long. He claimed to have written several songs about me, but I didn't care. I was just happy to focus on something other than worrying about my husband. Kyle was with me when they found the plane. It had broken into several pieces upon crashing. There were many fires and explosions near the wreckage. The authorities were checking the company's computer records to see how many passengers were on board that day. Since recent bookings had changed, they couldn't be sure. Clint was one of those last-minute bookings. We showed them Frank's receipt as proof Clint was on that flight. The passenger list showed only 13 people aboard, but with the latest bookings, there could have been 15 or even 20 with the crew and flight attendants. They found 15 bodies, which officials hoped were the confirmed passengers. This way, they could wrap up the case. DNA testing would still be needed for identification, but it would be a step forward. I cried for 3 days straight while Kyle stayed by my side. I didn't care if anyone saw us together. 2 days later, things took a turn. They found something unexpected that made them continue searching. A team from a Canadian company en route to help investigate the crash discovered 3 bodies north of the crash site. 2 were men and 1 was a woman in a jacket with the airline's logo. It seemed 3 people had survived the crash but died while trying to find safety. The nearest town was over 100 miles away. It was a risky escape, and they likely wouldn't have made it. 1 man was found with his mouth open as if he were still speaking when he passed away. Frank and I went to the site to identify the bodies. We had already seen all the remains except for those that were badly burned and needed DNA help for identification. None of the bodies were Clint's. That night, Kyle asked me when we would get a check from the insurance. The next morning, I woke up and realized I was holding someone's hand. My hand was on my wristband. It explained why I didn't hear the alarm. My arms were wrapped around her. We were in a close position, and I felt a bit guilty. "Delia, wake up," I said. "I'm not asleep," she replied cheerfully. "We need to get up." "No, I feel warm and cozy. Why get up?" she asked, turning to face me. Her striking blue-green eyes were captivating. Our faces were so close that it took all my willpower not to kiss her. "Give me one good reason to get up," she challenged. "Breakfast," I answered. "Okay, that's a good reason," she agreed. "Do we have breakfast?" I nodded. "And lunch. And dinner, too. If we're careful and eat some chips or nuts for lunch, we have enough food for over a week." "I think your ankle will be better by then. If no one finds us, we can return to the plane for more supplies." "Sounds like a plan," she said. "Let's eat." I started a fire and used it to heat the food. There were even a few plates in the kitchen. After breakfast, I explored the lodge. There was a loft above, but it was too far from the fire to stay warm. We had to sleep by the fire. I was about to check other buildings when I realized we were covered in snow. I spent the rest of the day talking to Delia. Although our conversations were light, it was clear we were growing closer. Delia enjoyed teasing me and testing my limits. We could talk about simple things, and she would look at me with her pretty bluish-green eyes and ask, "You like me, don't you?" That made me smile. Once I told her I needed to go outside and get more firewood before we ran out. She would tease me about the cold. "It's really cold out there," she said. "I know," I replied, "but I can't let you freeze." She smiled and said, "You really can't." I made several trips and stacked enough wood by the door to keep us warm for a few days. "Are you cold?" she asked. "Not really," I told her. "I think it worked," she said with a grin. "I warmed you up a little while I got firewood for us." Then she laughed for no reason at all. "What's so funny?" I asked. "You got wood from me to collect wood for me?" She chuckled. I stepped out to grab a blanket and our dinner supplies. I let her pick what we would eat. She chose meatloaf, and I picked chicken parmesan, which looked great on the package. After dinner, I took a water bottle and washed our dishes using some soap I found under the sink. I was happy we had a sink. Running water would have been nice, though. "I haven't moved much today except to go to the bathroom," she said. "But I'm tired. Are you going to sleep?" I thought for a moment. "Come on, Clint," she urged. "It's getting dark, and we have nothing else to do. Throw a couple of logs on the fire and come under this blanket with me." We talked for a while before falling asleep. Delia shared her life story and opened up completely this time. I realized I was wrong about her. She was so much more than I thought. Her father owned a store and raised her to be a kind person. She married her high school sweetheart when they were both 18. He joined the army, and they decided to wait to have children until he finished his service and went to college. He extended his time in the army to get the best benefits. Things were going well. They bought a house and started planning for his return to civilian life. David was gentle, funny, and always very loyal to her. Even though he was not a good dancer and tripped often, he made her laugh. At their prom, she wore a lovely dress, but he wore work boots. They tried to dance even when they were clumsy together. After that night, he asked for her hand in marriage. She loved him deeply and believed he felt the same way. David loved her for who she was, not just her looks. He never minded how she wished to be different. Before he returned home for good, he tripped one last time. The accident took him away forever, and she was heartbroken. The happy girl who loved gardening and wanted to be a mother never came back. She moved back in with her parents after selling their house, and it took her nearly 4 years to recover from his death. At 28, she got her first job as a waitress. Although she became good at it, she struggled with rude comments from some customers about her body. She got unwanted attention, especially from men. Some even made bets to prove her looks. She was uncomfortable and turned down an offer to dance at a nearby club. A few years later, she learned the club owner had a website where he shared pictures of his dancers. It was popular at first, but the trends changed. Men started to prefer women who looked more like everyday people. If her father hadn't gotten sick and her mother needed help with bills, she don't think she would have done it. But she quickly gained attention for how she looked. She bought a camera and took photos of herself at home. A few weeks later, she left her job at the restaurant. She wanted me to know that nothing inappropriate ever happened in her work. She never had any sexual experiences with men or women. Instead, she posted new photos of herself on her website each week, some teasing and some where viewers had to pay to see more. She made good money but always expected interest to fade. Over time, she began to take requests for specific poses or outfits and began making videos as well. All her photos and videos were solo, and she managed to find her own path in a world that had changed for her. Her father died a few years ago, and her mother passed away not long after. This left her alone without any close family, except for the aunt she had just visited. She felt a deep sadness in her heart because of their loss. Over the years, she met many men, mostly for work, but she never went on dates. She became good at making men feel attracted to her by using clever words and being playful. It's a little surprising that she had only one close partner since David died. Taki took care of her needs, helping her feel calm after long days at work. She learned how to understand what people wanted from her, but also how to keep a distance from those who may not have good intentions. "You remind me of David in many ways, Clint," she said as they relaxed on the couch. "You have the same shyness and protective nature, and when you talk to me, you really look into my eyes. But if I look directly at you, you look away, even though you like me," she added. "I know you are married and I understand your values, but I can't help wanting you," she said. "But Delia, we're both good people," Clint replied, "and good people don't betray others." "I don't have anyone else in my life besides you," she insisted. "But good women don't get involved with married men," he pointed out. She laughed. "You know what I do for work, right? People pay to see me online, and you still think I'm a good person? Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Delia," he said. As she leaned against him, he wished he didn't have such strict morals. She thought of him as someone else, and he felt confused. The man he loved was gone and presumed dead. On one hand, Frank and Clint's family were sure he was still alive, just stuck somewhere without a way to call for help. His brother Chuck kept reminding him about Christmas dinner that year and expected Clint and him to be there. On the other hand, the insurance company did not show any concern for Clint or him. They refused to pay without proof of a death certificate and insisted on a DNA test for verification. His parents, being more realistic, started to suggest planning a funeral. In the end, he told everyone to leave him alone. He needed time to think. The truth was somewhere in between. He needed to discover what he truly wanted. For most of his life, he had relied on his parents or Clint for support, so they controlled his finances. He had taken out an insurance policy on Clint for $250,000 in case of an accident. If they couldn't prove any mistakes on the crew's part, the policy would double. This was a lot of money. Although he loved Clint, he knew it could be beneficial. But if Clint returned, they would be much better off in a few years. There was a big difference between we and I. Kyle had different goals. He was trying to win her over because he saw a chance to benefit from her situation. He was overly nice and kept expressing his affection, often getting too close. For some reason, he believed he could be with her and share her future money. But she had to admit that having him around distracted her. She just wanted everything to resolve itself, whether that meant getting her husband back or receiving a check from the insurance. She hadn't decided which option she preferred. Eventually, she thought about leaving Kyle. Even though she didn't love him, she felt like she had control over him, and that felt nice. Her relationship with Clint, and possibly with any man, would require adjustments and compromises. In her dynamic with Kyle, she was clearly in charge. If she wanted him to meet her needs without getting anything in return, he would have to comply. She found a sense of satisfaction in that control. The second reason for wanting to end it with Kyle was that she didn't want to feel alone. When most men heard widow attached to her name, it seemed like a turnoff. Half of them stayed away, thinking she was trouble, while the others felt too sorry to make a move. She was caught between wanting Clint back and wanting the insurance money, but she was leaning more towards getting Clint back. The night before, while Kyle was too close for comfort, she daydreamed about what her children might look like with him. She decided that having kids was better with someone else than with Kyle. "Delilah," she thought, "only you could go through a plane crash and still find a silver lining." She spent almost a week in a cabin in the Canadian wilderness with Clint, and they grew closer each day. He was the first man to show real interest in her in a long time. She felt a strong attraction toward him because of her long period of solitude. The only thing more intense than her feelings for him was the disappointment that they had yet to take their relationship further. If she could stay with Clint, she wanted to make him the happiest man alive. Besides all his wonderful traits, she felt sure he shared her feelings. She admired his efforts to remain faithful to his wife. A few days ago, we found out that we both had old phones in our pockets. A brick is a phone that doesn't work for calls. His iPhone was almost out of battery while my Samsung still had 75% left. He showed me a few pictures of his wife and one of his cars. I laughed a little, but honestly, I was more interested in the car. Anything he cared about enough to take a picture of was worth my attention. His wife was amusing in a way. She was tall, thin, and had a sort of sharp look. She didn't seem like someone you could trust easily. Even in pictures, it was clear that she cared more about herself than about him. Seeing her made me think about my own weight. Nothing too extreme, really. I liked my body, and many guys seemed to too. But I could drop a few inches off my waist. I felt like this was more of a concern for me than for Clint. Every night, he placed his hand on my stomach, so I figured it couldn't be that bad. Of course, I made sure that each morning his hands found their way to my chest before he woke up. My wish to lose some weight partly came from seeing his wife. This was probably my only insecurity. Her chest, though artificial, was much smaller than mine. It looked stiff and didn't move like real breasts, almost like two balls stuck to a flat chest. Even models didn't like that style. Many older women liked it, though. The only good thing about that look was that they seemed really firm when dressed. But they didn't move at all. Most men preferred a more natural look. So I thought, 1 point for real breasts and 2 for larger natural ones. She also had no curves. It was like her lower back just led right into her legs. That flat look was in style once, but now most men liked more shape. Her figure looked good in baggy clothes, but in jeans or fitted skirts you could see something was missing. That shape didn't work with a thong either. Her legs were long but too skinny. Clint often helped massage them when they were sore, but I think he just liked touching them. Unfortunately, he was right about my ankle. I hadn't told him yet, but I could walk a bit on it. It was getting stronger daily, just like my feelings for him. I didn't want to leave this place. You might think that after spending so much time together, someone would need a break. But I didn't feel that way at all. Every night I got closer to my wishes. Last night, as we sat on the couch talking, things shifted. We took our usual spots. He was behind me, and I tried to rub against him a little. This time it felt different because he was responding too. I felt more excited and didn't want to say anything that might spoil it. I slowly moved his hand from my stomach up so it barely brushed against my chest. Clint seemed lost in our moment. We talked and touched each other as always. Soon we were acting as if there were no tomorrow. I felt great. I began to unbutton my blouse, enjoying his hands on my skin. I couldn't hold back my sounds of excitement. As soon as I did, I could feel him tense up instantly. "I'm sorry," he said, pulling his hands away like he had touched something hot. "Me too," I said. "It's too bad you stopped." He reminded me that we both had partners who would be hurt by our actions. "You have Katie, and I have Tokai," he said. I laughed again. "There's no one at home," I explained. Tokai was my playful nickname for a personal item. No one had seen or touched me in a long time, so excuse me if I enjoyed our moment. Clint showed self-control. "Delilah, if I weren't married, things might be different," he began. I cut him off, trying to keep my voice steady. I knew if he said the words I longed to hear, I would be all in. It would be easy because he would go along with it. If someone had asked me before if I would date a married man, I would have laughed. Now, I found myself considering it. It turned out I might do almost anything for the right man, except hurt the one I cared for. I was relieved when he pulled me close again and started rubbing my belly once more. My sounds were real. I was sure he wouldn't back away after this. It became clear that he didn't want to stop, but there was a limit he wasn't ready to cross. "So, how do you celebrate Christmas?" he asked, shifting to a safer topic. I shared how I usually visit my aunt, exchanging small gifts with my coworkers. I had known some of them for nearly 15 years, but we mostly communicated online. I didn't have many close friends in real life. He tried to change the subject, thinking I might get sad. "Your ankle seems to be improving," he said. "Let's see if we can walk to the plane for food in a couple of days. The snow should melt enough for us to get there." "Why not go tomorrow?" I suggested. He looked surprised, almost as if I had startled him. "You don't have to answer if you aren't ready," I added. He stayed quiet for a long time. "I already know what you're thinking," I continued. "You don't want to leave me, and you're trying to find a way for us to stay together longer. But you don't have to. I'll stay here with you as long as you want." "I'm thinking you should go. If someone finds the plane, we can both be rescued," he said. "If you get there and someone sees the plane, they probably have a car. You could drive back here in no time." I stayed quiet for a while. "Clint, can we talk about Christmas again?" I asked. "We can talk about anything," he replied. "No, we can't," I said firmly, "because I could ask you about your feelings for me and your feelings for your thin wife. That would make things awkward." "It's Christmas," he said. "Fine, we'll do what you want," I said. "We'll wait a couple more days and then go to the plane to get food. If someone finds the plane, we'll be saved. I'll go back to my life and you'll go back to your wife. No one will know what happened between us. I'll always remember this and you. It will be like a special secret just for us. At least that's how I see it." Maybe you'll feel embarrassed about it, so you won't talk about it. Either way, we don't know what will happen. Anything could happen. The weather might get colder. We might get a lot more snow. Maybe no one found the plane, and we'll wait here for weeks. So I want you to promise me something, okay? I promise, he said. I didn't know how, but he broke my heart again. No, you can't promise until you know what I'm asking, I said, trying not to cry. It might be something you don't want to do. Delilah. I'd do anything for you, he said. I could tell he meant it. Call it a Christmas wish, I said. I want you to promise that if we're here for Christmas, we'll forget everything else and just be with each other for a little while. We won't talk about your wife or mine or whatever else. We'll just spend this one day without any of our baggage. The room got really quiet. I thought I might have gone too far. I knew what I was asking. I promise, he replied. After that, we both fell asleep. We hugged a bit tighter than usual, and that night I made a decision. I still had a whole day before we went to the plane. I wanted to let him know how I really felt, but the line between us was getting closer. I woke up the next morning feeling light and happy, almost like I was floating. My body felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Just before breakfast, I started to walk around the cabin for the first time. I walked slowly, but I enjoyed the feeling of Clint watching me while he started the fire and warmed our food. As we sat down to eat, I undid a few buttons on my shirt. I saw that Clint was a bit shaky. Then I noticed where his eyes were. I smiled big at him. "What are you looking at?" I asked, pretending to be innocent. Clint nearly choked on his breakfast. I just smiled wider, feeling playful. A little while later, Clint grabbed some blankets and a knife. "What are you doing?" I asked. He turned around and saw that I was holding some of my clothes. "Oh, I'm just going to wash some things," he said. "We've been wearing the same clothes for days. I'll hang them by the fire to dry." "What about you?" I asked again. "We only have these light jackets we wore on the plane," he said, picking up a blanket he had cut. He threw it over me, making a makeshift poncho. For a moment, our eyes met. I thought he might lean in closer. "I love that beautiful red hair," he said, trying to tidy my hair through the hole he made. I knew then what I needed to do. I took his hands gently and smiled. "Now that I have this, I can wash my other clothes," I said. I slowly took off my poncho and tossed my hair. For some reason, I could tell he was fascinated. I moved a little, and I could see his surprise as his eyes widened. I playfully swayed my hips as I took off my skirt. I wanted him to notice. I lingered, drawing out the moment longer than needed. "Are you taking off your clothes here?" he asked, surprised. "I wanted to give you a chance to see what you can't seem to acknowledge," I smiled. "We've danced around this for a while. You made it clear that you won't act, so I feel safe. Besides, I'll put the poncho back on soon." After we had dinner, the air between us felt thick with unspoken words. As I finished my meal and wiped my fingers clean, I smiled at him. "We have a big day tomorrow, dear. Let's head to bed. Or maybe the sofa?" I took off my poncho and lay down on the sofa, lifting the blanket and inviting him to join me. He walked over slowly, shaking his head. I yawned and pulled his hands gently toward me. "Nothing is different here, sweetheart," I said. "I'm still the same person. This is still me." I placed one of his hands on my stomach. His touch felt nice against my skin. Then I placed my other hand on my chest. I felt him tense up behind me. I think we both sighed at the same time. He began to stroke and touch me in ways I loved. If the world were to end, I would want to go this way. "Clint, if someone tries to wake me up tonight, please do so I can enjoy it," I said sleepily. "No one but us will ever know." He started running his fingers through my hair and kissed my neck again. "Good night, Delilah," he whispered. "Clint, Delilah." I had never met anyone quite like her. Before her, I was so certain of everything. I felt sure about my life and my beliefs about right and wrong. It was almost like an addiction. My thoughts always became fuzzy around her. It seemed like the lines between right and wrong were always unclear. She brought color into my black and white view of the world. She showed me flowers I didn't even know existed. Even though I knew it was wrong, I secretly hoped that it would start snowing heavily. I wanted a big snowstorm right after we got to the plane. I wanted us to rush to gather enough food for a week or more and head back while she rested in my arms. More than anything, I wanted to hold her for as long as I could. One night, she turned over, and we were lying face to face. Her head was on my chest. I had my arms around her waist, holding her close. Until that moment, I thought Katie's strong form was a treasure. Could it be that my ideas about what I found appealing had changed so fast? As much as I cared for Katie, the choice between being close with her and the person I was holding right then might not have gone the way I always thought it would. Delilah promised that no one would ever find out. Should I give in to something that felt a little wrong? Why should this be wrong? This could make both Delilah and me so happy. How could that be bad? Happiness is supposed to be good. Two people can be happy and no one gets hurt. Sounds like a win-win. But it was just like many tempting things, like addiction or too much of anything good. But in the end, it can be hard for you. As much as I wanted this, it would only cause problems later. There are no more secrets in the world. Nothing can stay hidden forever. Eventually, Katie would find out, and she would get hurt. I could give up a bit of short-term happiness to protect my marriage. When I looked at her face, even without makeup, her lips were pink like a rose. I imagined they would taste like the sweetest strawberries. I thought of her beautiful green-blue eyes behind her closed eyelids. What was happening in my mind? I never had these feelings about Katie. I didn't like how Katie's body looked even after her surgery. It seemed like something she did to impress others. It was starting to get light in the cabin and we needed to go. I really didn't want to. Delilah was still asleep. Should I dare take a moment to remember? What's the harm? We'd be back soon, but I knew she wouldn't want to know. She would try to win me over even more. I only wanted a tiny moment. I leaned down and kissed her softly, not where I shouldn't, but on her sweet lips. It felt like we kissed for hours, but I knew it couldn't have lasted that long. She said it was just a friendly kiss goodbye. I chuckled. "Keep dreaming," she laughed. "I haven't slept well in a long time. You just told me everything I needed to know." "About what?" I asked. "Sorry, I didn't mean to rush you. It was just a kiss." "Rush me?" She laughed. "I told you that you could hold me. I wanted you to do this. You contradict yourself." Her smile could light up the whole forest. "About what?" I asked. "I'll tell you later." "Maybe," she said. We got up from the sofa. I went to wash my face and rinse my mouth with some water. She made a big show of putting on her clothes, pulling everything back into place slowly. In my mind, she was begging me to be closer to her. Then she pulled up her skirt and buttoned her blouse only halfway, leaving it unbuttoned just a little. She probably did it to keep teasing me. An hour later, we were wrapped in my makeshift ponchos. We each wore a warm blanket over our shoulders. We held hands as we walked through the gate, heading back the way we came so many days ago. It felt like just a short time ago. We arrived here in the middle of a snowstorm. But that morning, the sun was shining, and I heard sounds in the forest around us. The ground was wet from melting snow. Delilah seemed to shine as we walked. It took me almost 2 hours to haul Delilah and our things on a makeshift sled. Of course, I was worn out, pulling more than my weight through the snow, hardly seeing where I was going. It took us less than an hour to reach the back of the plane. She seemed unaffected by animals or people. Delilah smiled, and her smile was so bright it was like she had swallowed the sun. "They're not going to save you," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What do you mean you won't be saved?" I asked. "Aren't you coming with me?" "You need saving from me," she replied with a grin. "One more night on this couch and we'll be very close. You can't even imagine." "Well, I have a few ideas," I said, feeling as happy as she was, even if I didn't want to admit it. "I won't get too close to you until we get home," she said, crossing her arms. "Delilah, look at the sky," I said. She looked up. "What?" she asked. "Looks like you'll get your wish," I replied. "Check out those clouds. We have maybe an hour or two before it snows again." "We need to quickly gather food and whatever else we can carry back," I said. "You called the cabin home?" I asked. She nodded shyly. "Well, let's get going," I said, giving her a gentle pat. "We need food and water. We should also grab those little liquor bottles," she suggested. I thought it might be good to lighten the mood with a drink. Walking through the plane, I noticed things seemed different, like some items had been moved. Maybe animals had caused the changes. It was still very cold, and the food was kept in a metal refrigerator that stayed cold. We laid a blanket on the ground and gathered all types of food and supplies. Delilah found a purse that looked like it belonged to one of the flight attendants. She tossed some makeup into the pile. "Why are you taking this?" I laughed. "You don't need it. You're beautiful as you are." "Thanks for the compliment," she replied with a laugh. "If you were so eager to be close, you should have acted on it sooner." Just then, a voice rang out from outside. "Hey, get away from there!" an officer shouted. "You're messing with evidence!" A stout investigator stepped onto the plane and glared at us. "How am I supposed to figure out how this plane crashed if people like you keep moving stuff around?" he yelled. "Look at what you've done. People died here, and I need to sort this out. The help I have is as smart as trained monkeys. I'd take monkeys over this." He looked at our gathered items and turned even redder. "You've ruined everything," he shouted. "What did I do? That's it. You're under arrest. Get the cops here now." "You could just ask us," I said softly. "You mean you remember where everything was?" he said with a smile. "No, you fool!" Delilah yelled. "We were on a plane. Go ahead, arrest us. You'll just look foolish." "What kind of investigator are you?" I asked. "You had a chance to be a hero, but now you look ridiculous." "What's your name?" he demanded. "Clint." "Don't tell him anything," Delilah shouted. "You're Clinton Connors," he yelled back. "You're on the list." He was jumping up and down like a kid who really needed the bathroom. "Hey, everyone, call a helicopter," he shouted. "I'm a hero. I found the only survivors." He then told us to sit down. "After everything you've been through, you must be tired and hungry. The helicopter will be here soon. I saved you both." Delilah glared. "You're a jerk. We're not getting into anything that flies. I won't even ride in a truck that's too high." "Why is she mad at me?" he asked. "She should thank me for saving her." I told him, "I think she didn't want to be rescued. She had plans for the night." Less than 10 minutes later, we were holding hands in the back seat of a Jeep as the snow began to fall. "You were wrong," she said. "We didn't have 2 hours after all. We'll have to carry all this food through the snow." She squeezed my hand. An hour later, we were driving through a modern Canadian city. Many people wanted to ask us questions. I called my friend Frank. "Clint, I knew something like this wouldn't stop you," he said. "I'll reschedule your meeting for tomorrow morning. You can go home right after. Katie is worried. I'll let her know you're okay." "Don't tell her," I replied. "I want to surprise her." "Why not? It'll be like those stories of soldiers surprising their families when they come home," he said. "If you tell her I was found, she'll insist I come home right away. There won't be a meeting." "Fine. I won't say a thing," he agreed. Delilah turned down a ride on the plane back home. She wanted to return to Michigan. It was funny that we both lived in the same state. I needed to stay a couple more days to meet with the Canadian officials. After that, I would take a flight home. I insisted I would go with her. "It doesn't matter," she said. "We had a great adventure, and I have a secret." "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing you need to worry about," she said. "But I have a question for you." "Okay, ask," I replied. "What were you thinking when you looked at me that morning while you thought I was asleep?" she asked. I hesitated. "Don't even bother answering," she laughed. "I'm pretty sure I already know. But if you won't tell me, I won't share my secret. I'll ask you one more question. If you answer, you'll learn my secret. If not, maybe I should ask your wife." What question was I asking? What kind of man who touches a woman's body and imagines being close to her would ignore her and choose to kiss her on the lips instead? She asked me this, and then she leaned in and kissed me unexpectedly. Delilah smiled at me. I wanted to say something, but before I could, she jumped into a rented truck and drove away, not looking back. I was shocked that she was leaving my life so suddenly. It felt wrong, but maybe it was for the best. What we had in that little hut was just as she described. It was a thrilling adventure filled with secret memories we couldn't share. Those memories felt comforting when I thought of them, but they also had the power to ruin our lives. Perhaps it would be smarter to just keep them as memories and nothing more. Maybe what I thought was a connection was really just two strangers pressed together in a tough situation, making me think it was more than it was. For me, it felt like the ache of a first love. It was like finding someone in school who felt so different and captivating. Now that she was gone, I felt a heavy sadness in my heart. It was just a first crush, after all. Does anyone ever truly forget their first love? I doubt it. We always remember them until our last breath. Even so, we often end up with someone more suitable and real. I had to set aside these dreamy thoughts and return to my more practical, if less thrilling, life. It was time to say goodbye to vibrant feelings and face reality. Life is often very clear-cut. Working with the Canadians was simple. I got better terms than I had hoped for. There was a deal to close. They needed parts, and we had a mutual interest in making them. The only thing we needed to figure out was the money, which felt trivial after everything I had been through. I flew home on a large plane that felt like it could hold my whole neighborhood. Looking around, I saw no distractions. The plane was filled with people of different backgrounds, but none seemed interesting to me. The best part of my trip was when I finally reached the parking lot and saw my Mustang. I smiled, but it quickly faded when I had to pay for long-term parking. I hopped in, and the engine roared to life. Thankfully, there was no snow, or my car would have struggled to make it back. I started charging my phone in the car. I was happy when it turned on and all the missed messages from family came in. There were calls from my parents and many messages from Katie, wondering where I had been. I was sure they would all be glad to see me, and we could talk about my time away, at least the parts I could share. I knew that telling the story about Delilah wouldn't be wise. My feelings for her would show through my voice. I decided to record the moment Katie first saw me, so we could share it with our families. I quietly opened the door, hoping to surprise my wife, but when I stepped inside, I didn't see her on the first floor. I heard a strange noise coming from upstairs. Phone in hand, I crept up the stairs, excited to surprise her. What I found was shocking. The bedroom door was open, and Katie was lying on our bed with another young man. He was all flashy, wearing fake gold chains, and they were caught up in their own world. They didn't notice me standing just a few feet away. I watched them, confused. I suddenly wondered if Katie had pretended with me too. I felt I could read her well since I had known her for so long. Maybe she was just done with our relationship. I stood there, feeling a puzzling calm instead of anger. It was like watching a show on TV. Then Katie reacted. She suddenly turned and slapped him hard. "Kyle!" she yelled, a name that I could now add to the divorce papers. "Yes, Kyle," I cut in, feeling a sense of control in the midst of humiliation for him. After being with her for months, he should have figured out what she liked. "Don't be sad, you two. You can sort this out together, but now, gather your things and leave my house." Katie was both my hope and my nightmare. I had spent the days trying to sort my feelings. I finally realized there was a big difference between having money and real income. Money keeps changing and can feel stuck at times. Every time I spend money, my savings go down. On paper, $500,000 looked big. If I invested it smartly, it could grow with time. At 35, I thought about how it could grow more before I retired. Depending on luck, I could end up with a nice sum. But what would I live on until then? I had bills to cover, the car payment, insurance, mortgage, and many others. The insurance company was unlikely to say what happened to Clint was an accident. Their focus was on mechanical failures and human mistakes. Most likely, I would only get $250,000. Living on that for years would be hard. If I spent just $25,000 a year, it would be gone by the time I was 45. Even if I used Clint's pension, I wouldn't see any of that until I was 60. I had a big gap to fill, meaning I would likely need to find a job, which felt overwhelming. There was no way I could survive on $25,000 a year. It felt impossible. Clint had spoiled me. He loved me so much and showed me that I could have what I wanted without much effort. The current guy, Kyle, was not helping. He didn't seem to do anything important. The only reason he stuck around was that I didn't want to be alone. I spent time with him to keep him quiet. When we weren't together, he roamed the house, muttering and trying to make silly rhymes. Many times, I wanted to hit him. If I were to feel guilty, it should have been when Clint was alive. If I felt no guilt then, why should I feel it now? Clint had loved me deeply. He would want me to be happy. Relationships change over time, and I felt Kyle and I had reached that point. It was funny because Clint and I never reached that place. He adored me. I remembered the joy Clint gave me when he wasn't always busy with other things. I felt that pain. I screamed in frustration. My anger took time to settle. Kyle was going to pay for what he tried to do. Suddenly, I heard a voice that shocked me. I turned and saw Clint, my husband, standing in the doorway. My heart sank as I realized my situation. I felt exposed and wished I could disappear. But instead, I fell out of bed when Kyle pushed me away like he was scared. He scrambled to cover himself while trying to find his clothes. I struggled to breathe. Clint just stood there, smiling, holding a phone. Who was he going to call? Kyle tried to escape through a window but hurt himself on the latch. He screamed in pain, especially when Clint walked over to him. Kyle nodded like a fool when Clint asked if it was okay to call him by his name. None of us knew why Clint seemed so calm after finding Kyle in such a situation with me. Clint told Kyle to sit down and tossed his clothes into the hallway. He smiled wider and said he could dress himself if he wanted. Then he turned to me. I angrily told Clint that Kyle had forced me. Clint just laughed as he sat at the edge of the bed. "Katie, you can't think I'm as foolish as Kyle to believe that," he said calmly. Kyle stated he loved me and dreamed of being famous, promising to give me everything when he succeeded. Clint just wished him luck and pointed out how that hadn't worked out for him. In that moment, I realized Clint was surprisingly okay with what happened. We were both shocked. Clint didn't seem to mind what he saw, and I was stunned that he had hidden a desire to see someone else with me for so long. Clint smiled as he said maybe things could work out in a different way. Despite the weird situation, he acted surprisingly kind and polite, but then he added that maybe it was time for us to move out. I was confused and asked him if he really wanted Kyle to take me away. His expression changed quickly. Full of anger now, he shouted that he didn't care what we did but wanted us both gone from his home. I tried to remind him that it was our house, that we chose it together. He shrugged, saying people often make silly choices. He mentioned that my name wasn't on the mortgage, and the only way I could claim the house was through his death. His tone turned harsh, and I felt tears roll down my cheeks. But as I looked up, he seemed to calm down. "Listen, Katie," he said softly. "Maybe you should stay with your parents for a bit. Once you get a lawyer, we can talk about who gets the house," he continued, "while we figure out an agreement." "What agreement?" I asked. "Our lawyers will sort it out," he explained. "I'll begin by letting you keep the bed." "I don't think I could ever sleep on it again," I replied. "Which lawyers?" I wanted to know. "Why do we need them?" "Oh, come on," he said. "Frank told you everything, didn't he? If we want to get rich, we need to invest." "What are you talking about, Katie?" he replied. "We're getting a divorce. We need lawyers to file it." "I don't want to stand in the way of true love," I said. "I hope you and Kyle are very happy." I was in shock as I watched him give Kyle a high five. "We're not getting a divorce," I shouted. "Not a chance. The only true love here is between you and me." "You already did it," he said. "I have it on video. It'll be used as proof in the divorce." Kyle was dancing in the background. "Proof," he hummed. "The only solid thing here is Kyle." I couldn't believe I was ending up with him. Clint started filming Kyle's silly dance. "Kyle, take this phone," I said. Kyle stopped and looked puzzled. "Are you serious?" he asked, a bit scared of Clint. I nodded. He turned to Clint and said, "My lady told me to take your phone, so give it to me." Before Kyle could finish, Clint punched him in the mouth. Kyle went flying. Clint grabbed him and dragged him into the hallway, then tossed him down the stairs. He turned to me. "Get dressed, Katie, and leave, or I'll call the police and show them the video of you telling Kyle to steal my phone," he said. "But dear, we can work this out," I cried. "Get a lawyer and we can start the process," he said. I nodded. "Kyle, get up here and start putting my stuff in my car," I yelled. "Katie, you're leaving here in the clothes you're wearing," he said. "I'm still paying for this Lexus. It's staying until we figure out who gets what." Thankfully, Kyle had not spent all the money I gave him. We had to take a bus to my parents' house. I'd never ridden a city bus before. "These are my folks," Kyle said. "Look, I'll give them some." Suddenly, Kyle stood up and started rapping. 3 older women grabbed him and threw him off the bus. They looked at me because I had come in with him. I quickly got off the bus as well since his landing looked painful. After 2 long hours, we finally got to my parents' house, which usually takes only 20 minutes. I tried to explain to my parents what was happening, but it seemed Clint had already called them. To be fair, he had called them to say he would pay my lawyer and not block my credit cards until everything was concluded if I didn't go into debt. My mom, whom Clint could not refuse, got even more out of him. She told my dad everything, and they were both very upset. They started yelling as soon as I rang the bell. "It's not that bad," Kyle chimed in. I had serious doubts about Kyle being a good rapper. It was one thing to see my strong husband beat up Kyle, but watching my 68-year-old father chase Kyle surprised me. The last thing I saw was Kyle limping down the street, with my dad hot on his heels. If my mom hadn't made my dad come back home, who knows what might have happened to Kyle. The divorce was fast and rough. I got my clothes, my car, and some cash. I could not get more because Clint wouldn't budge. I tried to see a counselor and stop the divorce, but he posted a video on YouTube. That scandal could ruin my family's name and my reputation in the only city I've ever known. I wished for a house, but my lawyer and dad explained the real deal. The truth was, no judge would ever give me more than half of what we had, because I was seen as the one at fault, and I had done this while my husband was believed to be gone. My lawyer told me, "You won't get the house unless there are kids." He said, "The best hope is for the judge to order the house sold. If you really want it, you might as well buy it." "I told you to give me grandchildren," my mom complained. I couldn't believe it had come to this. I lost my home, my husband, and my marriage because of Kyle and my jealousy of Clint's job. Now, facing how hard it is to earn a living, I realized what a fool I had been. Sadly, Clint didn't want to hear my apologies. He took my apology with grace and tried to be fair in the settlement. All he wanted was to leave our marriage. I couldn't believe he had fallen out of love with me so fast. "What did you expect?" my father said angrily. "You broke his heart. Clint got a loan against our home and gave me $100,000 to cover my share of the house, plus another $50,000 instead of alimony. I also got half of our investments, around $20,000. He even said I could keep my Lexus as a goodwill gesture, but I would have to handle the payments once it was in my name. Once I saw how much the monthly payments and service contract for my car were, I decided to trade it in for a more affordable one. The service contract for my old car was actually more than what I had to pay each month for the new one. I was also moving to an apartment I could manage financially. I hoped that after a while the sadness of my choice would fade, and Clint and I could start fresh. It took us less than a week to figure out the details of our divorce, but it felt like forever. Our whole family was in chaos. It seemed like Christmas would not be joyful this year. I sat on the floor of my new apartment, tears streaming down my face. I used to search the big old house, trying to find where Clint hid my Christmas presents. This was the first time since meeting Clint that I felt so alone and unhappy on Christmas Day. The only person I could point fingers at was myself, Clint. My life could be summed up like a moment from a movie. It's like that part in The Matrix where a character wishes they had made a different choice. This past week I worked harder than ever, but even with all the effort, I felt empty inside. It wasn't really about the divorce, even if everyone thought so. My greatest struggle was regret. Like the character in the movie, I felt I made terrible choices in a crucial time and ruined my own happiness. I had chances to embrace joy, but I kept letting them slip away. I thought I was doing well, but was that just a misunderstanding? Is this what they meant when they said good intentions could lead to a bad outcome? A few days later, even Frank noticed my struggle. He called me into his office and told me I seemed too stressed. He thought I should take some time off after everything that happened. I needed to relax and find my peace. As soon as he said that, I knew what I had to do. I called my real estate agent and asked him to help me find a place. He checked one out for me and said it was ready. The seller was so eager to sell that he even danced with joy. I could take over right away or start a project to build something new. I told him I would visit the place soon. I went to Home Depot and picked up some supplies. I also delivered Christmas gifts to my parents and in-laws. They all seemed to understand that I needed time alone this Christmas. I wasn't sure my Mustang could handle the trip, so I was glad I had a Jeep for the winter. It took me over a day to drive through the deepening snow. But what could I expect? This was Canada, after all. I planned to spend the day thinking and deciding what to do with the old hunting lodge. I could probably fix up the cabins and make them modern. Maybe I could turn one of the cabins into a place for myself. Why only for me? Perhaps I could invite the entire team for a weekend getaway in the summer for fun and relaxation. As I reached what was now my property, I saw a car parked next to the gate. I thought it might be squatters, probably some teens from the area coming to hang out. Normally, I wouldn't care, but I really wanted this place to myself. I noticed many fresh footprints in the snow, which made it hard to tell where they led. From their size, it seemed like very small children had been playing around. I smiled when I saw a few footprints making snow angels. It was starting to get dark, and I guessed those little ones had gone home by now. I got the small generator I brought and set it on the porch of cabin 6. Then I went back to my Jeep to grab an extension cord and a heavy freezer filled with food. It was easier to pull it through the snow than carry it. I decided to take some of the food inside. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see a fire already burning in the fireplace. Someone else was in my cabin. "Okay, whoever you are, I'm the owner and I want you to leave," I shouted. "No, wait, you don't understand," a voice replied as a person walked in from the kitchen. My heart raced as I recognized her. It was Delilah. "You finally made it," she said with a smile. "I've been waiting for you for hours." I was shocked. "How did you know I'd be here?" I asked. "Oh, come on," she smiled. "You're single now. Most newly single guys are ready for some fun." "That's not why I came," I replied. I was serious. "I know that," she said. "But have you figured out your answer?" "Not really," I admitted. "I've been busy." "You still have time," she reassured me. "Christmas isn't here yet." "Great," I said. "Let's unload my stuff." We unloaded my Jeep and exchanged glances as we arranged everything. "You're going to stay here for a bit, right?" she asked. I replied, "I didn't bring much. I thought I'd come here to think about things." "What things?" she wondered. "What we shared here," I said softly. She smiled widely, and together we set up the cabin. I thought we would sleep in the attic, but Delilah had different ideas. She sat down on the sofa and wrapped herself in a blanket. "Come here," she said in a low voice. I hid behind the covers. She wanted me to remove my clothes. I did and climbed under the blanket with her. She shared everything that had happened since we broke up. She was back to her regular life, but even though she did the same things, she felt lonely. She missed me. She often expected me to reach out. I reminded her that we hadn't shared how to contact each other. She said it didn't matter. "There aren't many amateur film sites on the internet run by a woman named Delilah," she pointed out. "You could find me if you really wanted to." We were already touching each other gently. "Tell me what happened to you," she said. "How did you end up divorced? Just give me a quick answer. It's almost midnight and I want my surprise on time." A little later, she asked me another question. "Clint, why were you smiling when that guy had your ex-wife?" She wanted to know because she thought I shouldn't feel guilty about what we did together. And honestly, I didn't care anymore. It felt like a nice way to end things with her and get the divorce. It was also the same answer to a question I asked her. "You're clueless," she laughed. "Have you figured it out yet?" "I didn't kiss you when I had the chance," I admitted, because I was foolish. "No, sweetheart," she grinned. "You kissed me instead of just being touchy because when you looked at me, you saw our future together. That's why I'll gladly share something special with you that I haven't shared with anyone else since." "Since?" "Since David. You see me? You see Delilah. You don't just see my body. You love me, silly." "Yes, I do," I replied. We gazed into each other's eyes just as snow began to fall outside. Our first kiss was shy. We enjoyed each other in every way we could. We left a few things for later, but we continued until we were too tired. Lying together, we fell asleep. "Merry Christmas, sweetie," she whispered. "It was the best present." "It wasn't your gift, Del," I mumbled. The next morning, a sleepy Delilah woke me up. "Hey, are you going to make me breakfast like before?" she asked. "You woke up first," I said. "It's your turn." "So now that we've been together, you don't need to be nice anymore?" she teased. "You got what you wanted. Things are different now, right?" "You're probably bored with me already, Delilah," I joked. "Just go to the freezer, open it, and get some food." She reached for the robe she'd left by the sofa. I could tell from her face that she didn't like my tone. She opened the freezer and saw a box. She grabbed it and smiled. "Is this for me?" she asked. I nodded. She ripped the package open like a child opening a gift. Inside she found another smaller box, and inside that was an even smaller box. It contained a ring. Her excitement filled the cabin. "Are you proposing to me?" she whispered. I nodded. In the next moment we were close again. "Delilah, I will never get bored with you. I promise I will make you breakfast every day if you want." I told her. We got married the day after my divorce was final, and almost exactly 9 months after Christmas, our daughter Winter was born. Frank was not happy at first, but he accepted it when our son Frankie came a year later. It's funny, but my parents and Katie's parents became godparents to our kids. Katie's mom calls herself a stepmom, and the kids just call her grandma. We all get together for the holidays every year. Katie never comes, even though we invite her every time. She still seems upset about something. A few months ago, I met Kyle. He works at a local supermarket. He also brings shopping carts from the parking lot to the store. As soon as he saw me, he came over to chat. To my knowledge, he still hasn't become famous. Hey listeners, if you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.